Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Geezerology Roundtable. Today, Bob, Dan, and I are going to revisit the debut album by Joe Cocker, with a little help from my friends, which was released by A&M Records on April 23rd of 1969. With a little help from my friends, it was a minor hit in the US. It reached number 35 on the Billboard 200 album chart. But the title track was a #1 single in Cocker's home country, but it only got to number 68 here. But despite that, the album was actually more successful here than it was in the UK. Cocker was a rarity in this time period in rock music. He was not a visionary by any means. He was not a songwriter. He was not a creative force. This is a guy who was blessed with an incredibly emotive singing voice, and his biggest talent was his ability to belt out a tune. Give this guy a song to sing, and he'll sing it better than anybody ever has or ever will, right? But for the most part, he did not write songs. He was not a producer. He was not a musical arranger. He was a performer. Cocker and Chris Stainton was his main collaborator in the early part of Cocker's career. Well, they wrote a few tunes together here and there, but those mostly ended up as filler material. Of the 10 tracks on With a Little Help from My Friends, 3 of them are Cocker and Stainton compositions, but none of them are really memorable in any way. This is all about Cocker's performance. It's all about Cocker taking other people's songs and making each and every one of them sound and feel like the songs came straight out of Joe Cocker's soul. The Beatles song With a Little Help from My Friends sounds like nothing if not a Joe Cocker song. Dylan's Just Like a Woman and I Shall Be Released sound like Joe Cocker songs here. They don't sound like Bob Dylan songs. Traffic's Feeling All Right is a Joe Cocker song in this context. A couple of songs here, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, Do I Still Figure in Your Life, and Bye Bye Blackbird, which by the way has a blistering Jimmy Page guitar solo. But these 3 songs are jazz and blues obscurities from the 50s and 60s that became Joe Cocker's songs. There are 3 Cocker Stainton songs here, Changin' Louise, Margarine, and Sandpaper Cadillac. They're all pretty good tracks that work well in the context of the rest of this album, but none of them are really strong enough really to stand on their own. Margarine was released as the first single from this album, but it went absolutely nowhere, either in the UK or here. There are a couple of Cocker Stainton songs that are tacked on to later releases of this album as bonus material. New Age of Lily and Something's Coming On were leftovers originally issued as B-sides, but now they're part of this the current release of this album. But anyway, I've been listening to this album for quite a long time. This was not my entry into Joe Cocker. I'm pretty sure my first experience with Cocker was with The Letter, when The Letter became a hit single here in the US, and I would hear that on the radio. And that led me to Mad Dogs and Englishmen, which Bob and I talked about quite a while ago when we first started this channel. I got into the Cocker debut album retroactively, so this one pretty much supported my already established love of the guy. And to be honest, I mean, I've always said that if a novice has any interest in diving into Joe Cocker, Mad Dogs and Englishmen would probably be the place to go. I mean, that is the definitive Joe Cocker album. But if you want to talk about studio albums and the progression of Cocker's career and everything like that, this album, With a Little Help from My Friends, is probably the best studio album that he ever made, and it's probably a great place to start if you want to dive in and follow Joe Cocker and see what he was all about, and follow his career. It's an album that I've loved from the first time I've heard it. It's just a great album to listen to some some Joe Cocker performances. They're just some great blues and R&B songs sung by a guy who knew how to sing an R&B song, right? But anyway, now I've said my piece. I'll turn it over to Dee to give him his thoughts on with a little help from my friends.
Thank you, Scott, for that in-depth overview of the debut album by Joe Cocker. I too have this album, but it was again retroactive. The Letter, which was the first single that I heard on AM radio back in the time, which I really loved. And then about the time that the Woodstock documentary was released, that was the first time I saw Joe Cocker perform A Little Help from My Friends. And from what anybody else says, that song defined Woodstock in the era. You know, I mean, he's doing a cover of Lennon and McCartney's, but you know, the Beatles, I don't want to say their version on it, but their take, it was a little bit more kind of a happy-go-lucky song, and Cocker turns it into a deep, almost soul-wrenching interpretation for friendship. And then, you know, being that it was performed at Woodstock, which was, you know, the love, peace, and flowers, I think it is the premier song that people will take away from the movie documentary Woodstock. That being said, after I purchased this album, and I thought, wait, I said, I think Joe Cocker, when I first, let me backtrack a little bit. The first time I heard him, I said, oh, he must be black. And oh, boy, he sounds a lot like Ray Charles. Maybe that is Ray Charles. No, it's not Ray Charles. He was born with a voice that sounds a lot like Ray Charles, but beyond being born with those deep vocal abilities was the way he interpreted songs. And almost every song that he recorded on this album, there's a little bit of pain and just reaching in the well. Before the term was used, I guess, you know, Joe Cocker would say, oh, he was the master of blue-eyed soul. Obviously the guy loved American rhythm and blues. The songs on this album display that. Bye Bye Blackbird, Do I Still Figure in Your Life? But to me, this album is it's a real big kind of an amalgamation of things and it turned out really positive. You've got a lot of top studio English musicians that performed on this record. Everybody from Jimmy Page, Henry McCullough, Stevie Winwood, Carol Kay, B.J. Wilson, who was a drummer for Procol Harum. And you've got some of the best female backup vocalists, which I think it just adds another signature to this album. These just soaring, soulful tunes by them. And probably the one that a lot of people still would recognize as far as backup females would be Mary Clayton, who also did recording work for the Rolling Stones. And revisiting this album is like revisiting an old friend. I had it, and when you go through it, there's not a bad song. As Scott mentioned, the Chris Stanton, Joe Cocker tunes, you know, I can go, I'm kind of meh on those. But Margarine is probably my favorite of the Joe Cocker Chris Stanton collaboration. Now, you have to say this for Cocker, his selection of he chose 2 Dylan tunes, Just Like a Woman and I Shall Be Released, and I think his version of I Shall Be Released is the most heartfelt. I mean, you can hear Dylan's, and it's been recorded by multiple artists. Joe Cocker's is the version to listen to.
Yeah, it beats it. We talked about I Shall Be Released when we talked about the band a few weeks ago, and I think Joe Cocker's version beats the snot out of the version that the band did.
Oh yeah, and you know, oh yes, I mean, just the arrangement of it. And so you had a lot of top studio musicians, I believe the female singers were mostly American R&B singers, but I just love how he did with, of course, one of my other English groups I always liked, and one of their songs I tried to play on guitar was Feeling All Right, written by Dave Mason. Well, that's a good song, but I like Joe Cocker's version better with the keyboards on that. And I just think Feeling All Right, it gets the album off to a roaring start in terms of, you got some action here, you got some good R&B. And I think, Joe Cocker, after his debut album, of course, everyone knows he went on to have a lengthy career. Nobody else sounded like Joe Cocker. I wish I could have seen him perform live. It's one of the regrets I would have had. I think it would have just been, one of those you remember for a lifetime concerts. Some of the reviews at the time were very positive about this album in the music literature, music magazines at the time, and to the point where they said he is the first rock king of interpretation. I like to say that Joe Cocker was the premier song stylist of other contemporary artists. And, you can call it interpretation. I say he's the top song stylist, taking it his way, reinterpreting it. And, with Joe Cocker, he displays that he can do the rough, the dirtiest R&B, and yet he can do a ballad like nobody else. And part of his legacy was his live recordings. And yeah, he was a little freewheeling, and I'm afraid that part of his legacy was, that Joe was this spastic guy on stage. Well, he had an unorthodox stage performing session, and what's going to last is all these great recordings. And for anyone who is an R&B fan, I think this is a must. Well, if anybody's rhythm and blues, you have to revisit Joe Cocker. I think he came off the same R&B tree as Ray Charles and some of the other vocalists, and he made it his own. And I think he helped a lot of rock and roll fans rediscover some obscure, little known songs. And to top this album, which, in before recording Mad Dogs and Englishmen, yeah. But this is it's in my top 10 favorite LPs of all time, regardless of era. I think his songs and interpretations are timeless on this LP. I'd recommend it to anybody that enjoys, deep, blue-eyed soul singing. And
Bob, what do you have to say?
Dan mentioned the Ray Charles similarity. Yeah, and it's obvious. In fact, even Cocker used a female backup vocalist who came out of Ray Charles's Ray Letts backup singers. And yes, he made this material his own, and especially with a little help from my friends and Bye Bye Blackbird. And both of those songs were originally written to be sprightly, fun tunes. And, Bye Bye Blackbird dates back to 1926, with a little help from my friends, was written intentionally in a limited range for Ringo to have something to sing on Sgt. Pepper's. And Cocker took those two songs and just turned them into an ethos of human experience and feelings and pain, and he made them his songs. And I don't even think of With a Little Help from My Friends as a Beatles song. I think of it as a Joe Cocker song. And, you know, Bob Dylan started this myth of the singer-songwriter, that you weren't valid unless you wrote your own songs. And yes, it's wonderful if you can both perform and write, but I don't think that diminishes people who are able to go out there and perform material that they didn't necessarily write themselves if they bring something to it. And Cocker obviously brings, you know, his personality and his stuff to this material. I echo Feeling All Right is so much better than what Traffic ever did with that song. And Just Like a Woman and the Dylan covers. And I don't even want to call them covers, because, you know, a cover is you just reproduce what somebody else did. Cocker made it his own. He made it unique. And the people who backed him up on this album, Jimmy Page, Albert Lee, longtime collaborator Chris Stainton, Steve Winwood's on here. Dan mentioned Mary Clayton. The album was produced by Denny Cordell, you know, who was formerly with Procol Harum. So he had some very good people working with him. You know, my exposure to Cocker came from Woodstock, and I echo Dan there. I think his performance, with a little help from my friends, was the standout performance at Woodstock. And there were some dynamite performances at Woodstock, and I think Cocker is the epitome of those people who performed at Woodstock. And that was my introduction to him. And I, you know, I have this album. I agree with Scott. If you want to know Joe Cocker, listen to Mad Dogs and Englishmen. And one of my big regrets is that I never got it. I would have loved to have attended one of the shows from that Mad Dogs tour. I think it would have been a tremendous experience. I can't say enough good things about Cocker and his ability to take material and transform it and make it unique and make it evocative, and his ability to wring emotion out of this material is just outstanding. And I can't get enough of Cocker. I think he was tremendous. And if anybody's not familiar with his early work, you definitely need to get into it, especially you young people out there who may not know him. And he's so much more than his later stuff. You know, I think his earlier material is just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I want to say that Cocker was, you know, almost the last of an ancient breed, you know, where, you know, I mean, he was just he was an interpreter. He was a song interpreter that he could take any song and make it a Joe Cocker song. You know, it's like when you heard, even if it's a song that you knew very well, you know, and it's you know, by its original artist or whatever, but when you heard Joe Cocker sing it, it's like, this is a Joe Cocker song. You know, you stop thinking about the Beatles version of With a Little Help from My Friends. You stop thinking of Traffic's version of Feeling All Right. You stop thinking of Bob Dylan's version of Just Like a Woman, whatever. There, since this, in the last 50 years, there's been one I can think of that is even comparable to that, and that would have been Linda Ronstadt, right? Because Linda Ronstadt, you know, became huge and built a huge career on singing other people's songs. In fact, I think Ronstadt even more than Cocker. I don't think Linda Ronstadt ever wrote a song ever that she recorded anyway. You know, I mean, the Carpenters did some of that. Most of the Carpenters stuff was covers of other songs. Linda Ronstadt was thought of as an original, and Joe Cocker was thought of as an original. You know, now with Tony Bennett having packed it in, and Linda Ronstadt pretty much having packed it in, she's in pretty bad health, and you know, and Cocker died a few years ago. I can't think of anybody who's left who does this. Can you?
Off the top of my head, no.
I mean, people do it. There are still people out there who, who make a good living and who are pretty good, who are pretty talented, keep us entertained, who doing other people's songs, but not to the extent that Cocker and Ronstadt and Tony Bennett would make them a Joe Cocker, a Linda Ronstadt, or Tony Bennett song,
Exactly.
and do it consistently. I mean, everything they did, they took this piece over here and they took it and dropped it here and it said, "This is mine."
Yeah, the only one I can come up with, but he doesn't have that same amount of putting his own trademark on a song as Michael Bublé. That's the only one I can come up with.
Yeah,
And,
that's not even in the same league.
No, he doesn't. That's what I'm saying.
A lot of Michael Bublé fans out there, but he's a cover artist. Joe Cocker was not a cover artist, right? As Bob said, yeah.
Not everybody can write songs and perform them to a high degree of proficiency, but yeah, I don't know of anybody around that has stepped in those shoes. That there'll be the occasional artist that'll do an interpretation, say, yeah, that's something, but they didn't do a career of it.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, there are people who, people do cover songs. Most albums that come out, if somebody has an album, they might have 9 tracks, and 8 tracks are songs they wrote, and then 1 track is a cover song they're doing, but they're obviously doing it as a cover song and as a tribute to the original song. That's not what Cocker did. Cocker poured his heart and soul into saying, this is me and this is my music. Guys like Brian Ferry built a pretty nice little side career when Roxy Music was still around, where he released 3 or 4 albums that were all cover songs, but that was the intention of his intention was to tell people, these are cover songs. This is the way I like to. These are the songs that I like. Where Cocker was saying, these are the songs that I sing. These are the songs that I feel. Right.
And let's give Cocker and Ronstadt their due. I mean, as us being members of the rock and roll generation, would you have ever consciously thought about listening to Bye Bye Blackbird? I never would have. I mean, I knew the song, but then Ronstadt at one point in her career did a whole series of albums recording, great American standard pop tunes and reintroduced those to a whole new generation. So these people, did do serious stuff, even though they may not have written their own material. So we do owe them a debt of gratitude.
Joe did a few more pretty good albums after that. This was probably, you can argue that this was probably the best album that he did in a studio anyway, not Mad Dogs and Englishman. But we're going to go ahead and run through the next 2 or 3 albums in his discography. Back in the early days, Joe Cocker was a damn rock star, and we're going to track his discography through his rock star days before substance abuse got the better of him, and he kind of settled into a more comfortable direction. But anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back on Friday with a review of some sort. We'll be back on next Tuesday with another roundtable discussion of an old classic album, and we look forward to talking to you again. So long.
So long, folks.